Good morning, everyone, or good evening, whenever you are listening to this. Today, we are talking about a very important and thrilling subject. Actually, it's relatable as this thing is happening now. We are discussing about the COVID 19 situation. We will be talking about the public awareness and pandemics, trying to answer the very important question. Are we ready to depend on people when it comes to fixing problems and facing pandemics or not? Now, first of all, before talking about the subject and how we are going to discuss it, let me introduce myself and my team members. I am Amr Essam, and we have Ahmed Azzam and Ahmed Ayman Abu. Now, how we are going to discuss this subject? First of all, we are going to talk about the history of pandemics and tragic events in order to understand how we acted in the past and how to benefit from this. And secondly, we will be talking with Ahmed Azzam about the current situation of COVID 19. And thirdly, we will conclude with Ahmed Ayman to try to learn how to deal with the future pandemics that will happen for sure. Now, let's start. Before talking about the pandemics and the epidemics, why do we study history? Let's talk about it frankly. When we study history, we have the chance to learn. It's important to understand our past, which in turn allow us to understand our present and to deal with our future. If we want to know how and why our world is the way it is today, we have to look to history for answer. People often say the history repeats itself, but I don't agree completely with this. But I believe if we study the successes and failures in our history, we can learn from them in order to learn how to avoid those mistakes. Now, let's start talking about the pandemics. First of all, we will be discussing some of the medical or the health epidemics that happened in our future, in our past, sorry. First of all, the plague, the Black Death, which happened all over the world in the 14th century, but the peak was in Europe. As many people believe, the main consequences of this pandemic was the start of the Renaissance era in Europe. But we won't be discussing the Renaissance now. We will be discussing a very important matter in this pandemic. Like you can see before you in this painting, what do we see? We see how the people reacted with the pandemic. We see some medieval flagelants in procession in the town of Tournai in the Netherlands in 1349. What was they doing? They are believing, they were believing, of course, that this pandemic was sent from God, that it was punishment from the Lord. And as you can see in the painting, they thought that by whipping themselves, they would be purified and so avoid the plague. But this didn't happen. As we can see in this map, the arrows shows us how the pandemic spread all over Europe and how a lot of these countries were hardly hit by the virus. Some may say now that during this time we didn't know about how the pandemics are spreading, but actually during this pandemic the idea of the 40 days of quarantine started. So we had an idea, and actually this method helped in uh, reducing the spread of the virus, but it failed to stop the virus completely, as we are seeing there were some problems with the people themselves. Now, let's talk about another matter. Let's talk about the Spanish flu, which happened in the 20th century. Now, first of all, why do you think we are calling it Spanish flu? Did it start in Spain? No, it didn't start in Spain. Actually, it's believed that it started in the United States. But let's understand that during this time, in the historical context, there was World War One. In countries that was participating in the war, they neglected the virus and they didn't say anything about it. as they believed it will affect the morale of the people and the soldier. But Spain didn't participate in the war. It was a neutral country. So they announced the existence of the virus. And so people all over the world started calling it the Spanish flu. Here we can see the government are taking control of everything. We can see this kind of problem. 100 million people in the world. Example. Now, we talked about some medical pandemics. Let's talk about some political wise one. Let's start talking about the the Arab Revolution. As we understand from the history, this revolution happened during the World War One against the Ottoman Empire. Why did it happen? It happened because the Arab states or the Arab people wanted independence from the Ottoman Empire, and they actually, the Ottoman Empire was preoccupied by the war in different places in the world, and the Arab troops used this opportunity to wage war against the Ottoman Empire. Did they fulfill their goal? No, they didn't. Actually, after the war, the Turkish state, or let's talk frankly, the Ottoman Empire fell, and these people replaced the Ottoman conqueror by a British one or a French one. So did they fulfill their goals? No, they didn't. Actually, some people believe they fulfilled the goals of the British and the French government, as for example, the British government sent a spy named Lawrence who helped in raging this revolution. Now, this happened a century ago. What about something that happened 10 years ago? Let's talk about the Arab Spring. What happened in the Arab Spring? We lived through this. It was anti-government movement, wanted the justice, wanted to have social and economical equalities, and wanted to overthrow the government that were corrupted. And they succeeded in doing this in Tunisia, in Egypt, and in many other countries. Very painful, but wanted their independence from the corrupted government. Now, after 10 years, what happened? We all see it. We are all living in it now. When the awareness of the people is modified, when it's corrupted, we witnessed this backfall of the goals. Now, enough talking about the politics. Let's talk about the economy. And let's talk about two epidemics or two economical crises. First of all, let's talk about the tulip mania. Actually, the tulip mania is believed to be the first economical bubble in history. What is a bubble? Let's discuss what happened in this time in the Netherlands. All of a sudden, the people there started believing that the tulips have a value more than being some beautiful flowers. So they started buying a lot of tulips, and the prices have risen up a lot. And all of a sudden, they discovered what we were paying our money in it. And all of a sudden, the prices fell down. So before the crisis began, as you can see in this curve, actually, the price of one tulip, of a special kind of tulip, was equivalent to the money a very talented craftsman would get during one complete year. After this, the prices collapsed tragically, and we witnessed a tragical economical crisis in the Netherlands. Well, it happened in the 17th century. What about something more new? Let's discuss the financial crisis of 2008. What happened in this crisis that we all witnessed, and some believe that we are living today in some of the effects of this crisis, that the banks in the United States started giving people loans to live in a more comfortable life, but they weren't able to pay back those loans. So the banks has taken their homes, but the banks wasn't able to sell these homes to get their money back. So what happened is that we started having banks that bankrupted, and then a financial crisis started in Wall Street and to all over the globe, and we lost trillions of dollars in this crisis only because of the awareness of some people who wanted to live in a level that actually I won't say they didn't deserve it, but they couldn't live in it. They took loans that they couldn't give back. So the crisis happened. So as we have seen in these pandemics and these epidemics, what can happen when we have some corruption in the public awareness, and also what can happen when there is corruption in the governments. So we learn from our past now. Now we will talk about the current situation of the COVID-19 with my friend Ahmed Azzam. Go on, Ahmed.
Thank you, Amr. Hello, everyone. Now we will talk and start comparing between two concepts. The first is the countries that have relied on the awareness of the people. Despite the rules that they set to reduce the disease, the first of these countries is Italy. Initially, the government advised the people to stay in their home for a while to avoid the spread of the virus. But the Italian people didn't care about the matter and continued their normal life and daily routine and didn't deal with the matter seriously. They were walking in the streets and go shopping, but the result with this behavior was very dangerous and very negative, as the number of the infection with coronavirus increased very dramatically until Italy became the first in the world in number of infections with coronavirus for a long time, until the government put in place decisions to prevent movement in all streets in the country to avoid the virus. The second country that relies on the awareness of its people is Egypt. At the beginning of hearing the virus, some of the Egyptians dealt with the matter seriously and remained in their homes. But the majority of the people continued their daily lives and daily routine naturally. Although the Egyptian government advised the people to stay at their home, but after the number of infections increased, the government issued a curfew to contain the disease. But the streets, it's crowded with the people in the morning, and the situation seems to be getting out of control, dealing with the virus. On the other hand, there are some countries that depend on the strength of their government and the people to control the virus. We will start our talking about the Republic of China. Where the beginning of the virus was it? Especially in Wuhan, where 3 people are infected with the virus, but the Chinese government denied the news and didn't care about what happened, even after the disease spread in the beginning. The government said that the situation is under control, but the matter went out of control and the disease spread greatly in China until the city of Wuhan was completely closed. But this is too late, and the disease spread in over China and all the world. The government started to take a difficult and strong decisions to reduce the virus and try to discover a treatment for the coronavirus. After period, the government succeeded in reducing a number of infections and deaths and started gradually opening the roads and domestic travel in the country. And now We are talking about a country like Jordan. A country like Jordan is a great example of dealing with coronavirus. When they tracked a case of the person coming from Italy who was infected with coronavirus, they dealt with the situation very quickly and they began to take necessary decisions to limit the spread of the virus. The Jordanian government issued decisions to prevent movement in the country and ordered all people to stay in their homes and isolate. Many people coming from abroad are completely isolated. The decisions made by the government in the beginning were very strong and difficult decisions, but they have a positive result as the number of infections with coronavirus in Jordan didn't rise much and was very limited compared to the other countries. This is why the countries like Jordan is a successful country in dealing with coronavirus. The situation of in Jordan was under control until one of the citizens made a party at his home and invited all his friends and family. There are a big and many people in their homes, so a large number of them were infected with the coronavirus, and the disease was severe. But now, after we're talking about the current situation, we will
Thank you, Ahmed. Give me a second, please. Sorry, we apologize for the technical issues. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Amr, for the great introduction and for the information that you've already given to us. From here, I'll carry on and talk about the future pandemics, what should happen, what shouldn't, and the science behind it, and what about protective medicine culture. So we'll start now with the science. What is a protective, or actually we'll start with the right actions without no second thoughts. The right actions without no second thought is one of the most important actions, or one of the most important things to consider when we're talking about crisis, we're talking about problems, or actually when following a code to cope with the issues that we were dealing with. One of them is the pandemics. So here I will talk explicitly about the International Health Regulations, or IHR for short, and what the World Health Organizations do to cope with the H5N1 pandemic in 2005 and 2006, and what actually carried on to this day to fight our present problems. Geneva meeting in 2006, of September 2006. This meeting was held as a first meeting for the International or the Influenza Pandemic Task Force, which was created also by the WHO, besides the International Health Regulations, which was shaped from hereafter. This meeting actually considered the start of what the WHO should do and what should be stated when we're fighting or actually coping with these pandemics or future ones. 4 specific points were mentioned in this meeting. One of them, we will talk about them here, the criteria. How to define a pandemic before a disaster that happens. How could we actually expect a pandemic before it happens, actually, and what would it be? How would it go? Also, the information. We should study the genetic sequencing and also always updating the diagnostic parameters, so we could actually be ready when something happens. We could actually get the right study and the right conditions and symptoms to define a new virus. There's also surveillance, which is a constant monitoring for virus strains and what could happen if a virus developed and actually evolved into something else, which actually happens many years back and actually still happening till this day. One of the most important points that is mentioned in this meeting is the vaccines, the continuous and rapid development of vaccines and cures, which actually made things better when you're fighting specific or different pandemics. which actually should help down the line. Yes, it's still in development. Yes, it's not in its peak, not in its peak yet. But the concept of them always finding cure, always developing cure and rapid solutions makes us wondering what the future would hold for us. The protective medicine and the culture behind it. There have been studies that shows that protection is way more important than actually fighting a disease when you're already at it. So protective medicine might be one of the most important things to consider before fighting a pandemic or before actually any other problems, which is more of a scientific and health-wise. According to the experiments that were done in a case study in the book by the scientists and doctors in China, of the name protective effect of hand washing and good hygiene habits against seasonal influenza. They found that avoiding crowd would help, but unfortunately there wasn't a great statistics peak or statistics difference that could actually say crowd avoidance would help as much as we think, though it's still considered to avoid any germs or any transfer between people, whether or not he's sick or not. What was actually been proved in this experiment that cleaning your hands regularly has the most effect when keeping the influenza away and finding it from season to another. It's always looking forward to killing the bacteria on your hand before it actually transfers to your body and actually starts the influenza. And there, cleaning hands should be a must. There is also found that decreasing the contact between your face and hands actually made a huge more difference, which is it stops the transfer of your hands to your face, through your eyes, your mouth, your nose, and so. So yeah, these two specific habits actually were found in this experiment and this case study that it fought back this influenza and actually helped to decrease the transfer of it. So the most important point from this, or what was concluded from this experiment, is having the habits on a daily basis is suggested, extremely suggested by the scientists, without the need even to fight or have a pandemic. So having these habits should do. So we could conclude that keeping your hands clean with a good hygiene can be enough to keep one safe. So we've talked about the science, but what about the thought? What about the awareness? What about how people would accept something like protective medicine? Well, actually, we have a good example of this, which is Japan and the Japanese mask culture. It has been since around 1918, around the Spanish flu, and it's rising. And to this day, the Japanese culture has been influenced by the surgical masks, which many, if you go down to the streets of Japan on a regular day, not within a pandemic or pollution or otherwise, you would find a huge number of people wearing masks just because. Many Western people would think of this when they see a picture like this in front of me, as if there's a huge pollution there in the country. Well, actually, it is just for these people. And this picture was in 2016, by the way, which shows that people actually do this for their own benefit, to avoid any transfer or to avoid the seasonal influenza and so, which is by the people's choice, not without a PSA or any specific governmental announcement. Surprisingly, in 2016 only, there was about 5.5 billion masks in Japan, whether imported or manufactured, in their regular life, which shows how Japanese people demand these surgical masks for their own benefit, for their own protection. Besides that, we've done a survey in Cairo University Faculty of Engineering among our colleagues in sophomore level, and thankfully more than 120 people participated in this. And we actually asked them, how would they see people's effect and people's awareness effect and consciousness when fighting pandemics and other dreadful events, as my colleague Amr mentioned. There were actually some problems, or there were actually some diversity when they've been talking about the people's effectiveness, but most of the participants came to terms when they were asked about having a separate organization besides the government, so they could control the decisions that should happen and have a code to follow when something severe happens, whether pandemic-wise or so. But here we're specifically talking about health as the WHO. We've collected also some opinions and some comments among these people. Excuse me. We collected some opinions on some comments from these people who participated, and they had actually some good thoughts. One of them was, quote unquote, we need to improve our educational system. And actually, thinking about it, it would help in making public awareness and people's awareness from their childhood, and have our children risen to have a good awareness about what should happen and what shouldn't, would help down the line, wouldn't be a problem when something like Japan having their own people avoiding any transfer of virus, influenza, and so. There are also some people say people should. I believe that everyone should be responsible for themselves, which is true to an extent. The people's awareness itself can really be affected directly or easily, but should be strict rules that with harsh penalties that can be applied to control the situation, which was another comment by one of our colleagues, which actually most of them go to the way or the thought of that we will need to have a strict code to follow whenever there's a problem. So we've talked about the history, we've talked about the current situation. We've mentioned how some countries depended on strict rules and their effect, and how other countries depended on their people's consciousness and affect and awareness, and also its aftermath. And we've collected some of the historical and the scientific ways when it comes to protection, when it comes to facing problems, when people awareness come into play. We could conclude from this where is it's a yes and no when it comes to asking, should we depend fully on people's awareness or not? Because we could not depend on them fully on its own. There should be something else, a code to be exact, that people should follow, where they could actually understand what should happen. People's awareness is a must, nonetheless. People's awareness should be present and should be always in the picture. But with the right set of goals and the right set of actions, with something like the current state of COVID-19 happening, people should be aware of it and should follow without no second thought. Hopefully, we could answer your questions and the presentation. And if you have any more questions, we'll gladly answer them down in the comments below to this video. Thank you, and please stay safe. And hopefully this pandemic and the current situation, inshallah, passes without any problems, with the least damage, inshallah. Thank you, and stay safe.